Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with the US-Israeli war on Iran raging while Trump issues megalomaniacal orders to the Iranians that he will choose their next leader and that the recently killed Supreme Leader's son, Moshtaba Khamenei, is unacceptable. Joining us to discuss how the US is continuing to resort to force at growing cost in a region of diminishing importance is Steven Wertheim, a senior fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He is the author of Tomorrow the World, The Birth of U.S. Global Supremacy, and he has an article with Rob Malley at the New York Times where we'll discuss, of course, Trump bombed Iran. Then we'll look into how Iranians feel about being bombed in order to become free from a government that is increasingly oppressing them, and speak with Matthew Petti, an assistant editor at Reason magazine, who has recently reported for the BBC in Persian and English. He now covers U.S. national security policy and its interactions with American society and domestic politics, and we will discuss his latest article at Reason, The Goalposts of the Iran War Keep Shifting. Then finally we'll speak with Robert Baer, one of the most accomplished agents in CIA history and the winner of the Career Intelligence Medal. He is the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers, including The Devil We Know, dealing with the new Iranian superpower, and he's considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the Middle East and is an intelligence and national security affairs analyst for CNN. And his latest book is The Fourth Man, The Hunt for a KGB Spy at the Top of the CIA and the Rise of Putin's Russia. And he has operated in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon against the Iranian regime. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now is Steven Wertheim, who's a senior fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He's the author of Tomorrow the World, The Birth of U.S. Global Supremacy, and he has an article with Rob Malley in the New York Times, Of Course Trump Bombed Iran. Welcome to Background Briefing, Steven Wertheim.
Good to join you, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us, Steven. And you conclude your article by saying he is a most unusual figure. Of course, talking about Donald Trump, and I would suggest putting it rather mildly, but at any rate, he is a most unusual figure. But the road to this war was paved by many. Without fundamental change, the United States will remain on the same path, continually resorting to force at growing cost in a region of diminishing importance. Now, if that's not counterintuitive, I don't know what is, Stephen.
Well, I think we didn't hold back at the top of the piece about President Trump. The piece begins, President Trump's attack on Iran is astonishing in its audacity, aggression, and lawlessness. But I think what we're trying to understand, to take a step back in this moment, is how could it become possible that the United States, albeit under this unique president, ends up launching a full-scale attack on Iran. Rob Malley, my co-author, had been involved for a long time in trying to negotiate successfully one nuclear deal, and then under the Biden administration trying to revive it, the JCPOA. And, our concern is that in retrospect, it looks like there was almost no room in American politics to handle Iran through diplomacy. If you go back to the JCPOA, an absolutely effective agreement in doing what it was designed to do, which is to keep Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, that deal ultimately fell apart because not just because Trump pulled out of it, but because when he pulled out of it, he was reflecting the sentiment overwhelmingly of the Republican Party and quite a few Democrats as well. And I think what really felled the attempt, this important attempt to do diplomacy with Iran, was a commitment to, by many actors in the American political spectrum, to confront Iran, to not accept any kind of step that would lead to something like normal relations between the United States and the Islamic Republic. So I think the most potent argument against the nuclear deal was that it didn't address all of Iran's other malign activities, its missiles, its support for proxy groups in the region. But a wider deal that would have addressed every one of America's concerns was always going to be quite clearly impossible with that regime. So, what was the space for diplomacy at the end of the day? Seems to have been something like a null set.
Well, in terms of US strategy, if that's not too generous a description, when you talk about continually resorting to force, a growing cost in the region of diminishing importance, I'm wondering about what people like Elbridge Colby are thinking in the Department of Defense, or whether they have any influence, because it seems to me that we were dragged into this war largely by Prime Minister Netanyahu. At least that's what our Secretary of State Rubio said. And I think from what I've heard, Rubio was absolutely furious and really felt that he had to go public to basically say, this is what happened. They were about to pull the trigger and we got dragged into it.
Well, I think we're going to have to continue to piece through the evidence in terms of, how President Trump made this decision, whether Israel was pressuring him, whether it was a kind of mutual decision. But you're right. I mean, it's remarkable that people like Elbridge Colby, but many others who were supporters of President Trump and who went into his administration had been arguing for a long time that the United States was overextended, that it had no business trying to launch major wars in the Middle East or change other countries' regimes. The language in all the official documents, the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, which are just months old, all says that. And yet here is President Trump deciding to join Israel in launching an attack on Iran to seemingly flatten or overthrow the regime. And President Trump is now, playing apprentice with various figures who could potentially lead Iran. Oh, that one's not good enough. Acting like he's in control, but he's really out of control of this situation. So it's an absolutely head-spinning event. And as we write in the article, it's possible that only Donald Trump could have harnessed Americans' exhaustion with war, capitalized on it in 3 consecutive presidential elections, and wound up trying to make regime change great again.
But at the end of the day, it seems that maybe this is reflected also in what's going on in Syria, that there's a division between, or a split between the U.S. strategy and the Israeli one. Trump met with al-Shara, brokered and introduced to him by MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi leader, and the U.S. seems to be trying to stabilize Syria, whereas Israel, on the other hand, doesn't believe in al-Shara's conversion and thinks the leopard hasn't changed his spots, and they would prefer a fractured, a divided, and weakened Syria. It seems to me that may be what's going on with Iran, that while the US and the Israelis are coordinating, presumably, they're at war together, they're allies against Iran. At the same time, I don't see anybody figuring out what the post-war scenario is because the country's being broken. And I'm wondering whether at the end of the day you will end up with a mess in Iran, civil war, the Azeris in the north fighting the Iranians, the Kurds in the north west, and the Baluchis in the east, and the Arab Iranians in the south.
I think you're right to point to a potential divergence between the United States and Israel when it comes to the end game of this war. What would they prefer to see? Of course, they decided to go in together and launch this attack jointly, which is an incredible thing. But my view is that the Israelis are more inclined to flatten Iran, to potentially overthrow the regime or create chaos in Iran. That would suit them fine. President Trump, however, despite having made this reckless decision to launch a war where you simply can't plan for realistically for an outcome like this because it involves assassinating the top leadership. So there is no kind of planning that you can really make. To a large degree, you have to hope for the best. It's incredible. But President Trump has incentives, even now, to see this fighting not drag on for a long period of time and see some kind of stability return to Iran, at least so that the rest of the region, the Strait of Hormuz, U.S. security partners in the Gulf states, who Trump is close to, so that they can move on and not be indefinitely set back by strikes and instability, economic harm, and all the rest.
Well, I guess the difference is Trump says he basically wants to decide who the next leader of Iran is, and he finds Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of the recently killed supreme leader, to be unacceptable, whereas the Israelis are out to kill Mujtaba, right? They want to kill whoever's going to succeed the last guy they killed.
Yeah, it's a bit of a problem. So we have seen over the last year, Trump and Israel, while maintaining very close coordination and a very high level of political and military support, nevertheless, each putting pressure on the other. And this dynamic that you're pointing to is an important one. And of course, one should never assume that it's Trump and the United States that will have decisive leverage over Netanyahu and Israel. We've seen Israel play the United States, Netanyahu play Trump before, and Israel can create new realities by, as you say, killing figures that Trump may be thinking of having a future in a post-war Iranian government.
Well, as much as Iran is sort of falling apart and being destroyed from within, and now we're hearing reports that there are roadblocks all over the country, that the IRGC and the Basij are actively suppressing the people, and we don't seem to have any connections to the opposition except for the exiled son of the Shah. It would seem that in terms of the dominoes in the region falling, already the Gulf states that are being hit, Kuwait, Bahrain, which has a pretty big Shia population, as well as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, etc., and UAE, their people are getting angry because debris and bombs are raining down on them. The Iranians, if they target the desalination plants, these countries would be in real trouble because that's their water supply. And on top of that, already with the Straits of Hormuz closed, the food, 90% of their food is imported. It's not coming in. So I see that as being a dire situation just around the corner.
It's incredibly worrying. This is what happens when you launch an all-out assault on a regime. The regime has every incentive to do everything it can to stay in power and inflict costs on you in return so that eventually you'll go, because Iran will remain in Iran. The United States has much more limited interest in the future of Iran than the Iranians themselves do. So Trump, I think, managed to convince himself that the attack would probably go something like his raid on Maduro, that another Delcy Rodriguez kind of figure would emerge in Iran. Don't know if he had anyone in mind beforehand, but that looks unlikely to me. It's always looked unlikely. Instead, it's very likely going to be figures from within this entrenched system who end up in control, and they continue to have very high incentives to cling to power, to repress popular uprisings, and show that if you mess with Iran like this, there will be negative consequences. And I think that, the Iranians believe that time is on their side. I mean, it's not in the sense that their missile launchers are being targeted. Their capabilities are being diminished by U.S. and Israeli strikes, but it is on their side insofar as they can win by not losing. They can hold out and make chaos for their adversaries and their adversaries' partners and still end up ruling Iran at the end of the day.
So just in the last couple of minutes then, Stephen, given that the Hegseth and Rubio and Ratcliffe, the head of the CIA, briefed a bunch of senators, and the Democratic senators were extremely alarmed after this briefing. Many of them, like Chris Murphy and Blumenthal, said it looks as if this is an endless war, and we know that Trump has promised no endless wars. And there's some reports, or suspicions, I guess, that Trump actually is torn between not wanting an endless war, but on the other hand, wanting a longer war so that perhaps he can invoke the Insurrection Act and somehow rig the November elections, because the senators that left that briefing seemed to think that this was going to be a long war. What do you make of that?
Well, I think, every time the United States gets into a war initially, of course, the leaders don't think it's going to be an endless war and don't want an endless war. The problem is that once you launch a war like this, it's very hard to find an endpoint that is satisfying, that allows you to walk away and say, this war was worth it. And, I should not be punished politically. If anything, I should be rewarded. Now, there's still possibilities that could happen here. It's possible that Iran, having taken so much of a beating, will plead for mercy and the fighting can stop. But this has all the makings of an endless war, in the sense that the objectives that the United States and Israel have put forward, the rationale for the war, is one that almost requires Iran to develop a pro-US, pro-Israel kind of regime that's entirely different, not only from what actually exists in Iran, but in the ruling part of Iran, but in the entire country, because the country does not have organized political opposition. So it's very hard to see how a better Iran is going to emerge from this rubble. It is at best a huge gamble. And, even if, as the administration tries to say, oh no, this isn't an unlimited kind of objective, we're going to flatten the Iranian Navy, we're going to, take out their missile capability, we're going to degrade all parts of their military. So perhaps at best that happens in the coming weeks, months. Then what? Iran will rebuild at some point, and we're going to be back at this in a kind of open-ended, perpetual way. So even if combat is short, it can still set us up for a forever war.
Well, Steven Wertheim, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And again, I've been speaking with Steven Wertheim, who's a senior fellow in the American Statecraft Program at the Canadian Endowment for International Peace. He's the author of Tomorrow the World, The Birth of U.S. Global Supremacy. And he has an article with Rob Malley at the New York Times, Of Course Trump Bombed Iran. We're going to take a restation break back looking into how Iranians feel about being bombed in order to become free from a government that is increasingly oppressing them.
As some warn victory, some downfall, private reasons, great or small, can be seen in the eyes of those that call to make all that should be killed to crawl, while others say don't hate nothing at all except hatred. Disillusion words like bullets bark as human gods aim for their mark, make everything from toy guns that spark to flesh-colored Christs that glow in the dark. It's easy to see without looking too far that not much is really sacred.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Matthew Petti, an assistant editor at Reason magazine, who has previously reported for the BBC in Persian and in English. And he now covers U.S. national security policy and its interactions with American society and domestic politics. And his latest article at Reason is The Goalpost of the Iran War Keep Shifting. Welcome to Background Briefing, Matthew Petti.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And I must say, when you sort of watch Trump, and particularly his Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War, I guess he wants to call himself, Pete Hegseth, you know, all that sort of macho bluster that's coming out of Hegseth, and the kind of sort of cruel nature of we're going to rain hell down on Iran. And Trump today saying in this sort of grandiose way, well, I get to choose who the next leader of Iran is, and Mustafa Khamenei is unacceptable. I mean, it feels like a couple of nasty boys playing in a sandbox with war toys. How does it strike you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an exercise in power. I think fundamentally they went for Iran because it was just scary enough that it seems like an impressive enemy, but like also not so scary, just weak enough that they could attack it without consequences. So they thought. I think that actually they've been a little bit surprised by Iran fighting back, and the extent to which it's fought back and sort of regionalized the war. I think even if they had planned for this outcome, sort of in the abstract, like even if the military bureaucracy, the like serious professionals working under Hegseth who are not so blustery had maybe gamed these scenarios out, I don't think the people on top really internalized like, oh, this is a serious enemy. I mean, for now, they're fine with the amount of consequences, it seems. They're really reveling in the exercise of power. And I think it drives home that, like, if Iran really was a threat, as they claimed, they wouldn't have started this war. They're only starting it because they perceived Iran to not be a threat, to be easy to kick around without consequence.
So what do you think is happening on the ground? Because they've obviously cut off the internet and it's hard to get reports. But anecdotally, it seems as if, for example, there are roadblocks all over the country. So that would seem to me that the Basij and the security people in the IRGC are really locking the country down. There are a lot of civilian casualties, collateral damage. It's inescapable. They're blowing up local police stations, which makes you wonder about what kind of security there'd be, just against regular crime, let alone the repressive machinery of the state. So it seems pretty chaotic to me. How does it strike you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to talk to a couple people in Iran, three different people. I think at this point, it's hard to get in touch with everyone though. The people that I have managed to talk to just describe a very scary situation, although it seems very different. I think Tehran is under a lot of very heavy bombing. Other parts of the country seem safer. But actually, no, I think I've talked to 4 or 5 people at this point. Yeah, Tehran, it seems like there's really nowhere to run. It's just intense bombing all the time. Other parts of the country seem safer, but out in Kurdistan, I don't have sources on the ground there right now, but just from what I can deduce from what's being reported, is pretty intense bombing. I think with a clear goal of like inciting civil unrest and causing a rebellion. Yeah, I mean, and it's absolute carnage. A lot of people have been gotten killed. Thank God, I personally don't know anyone who's gotten killed. And I think like my sources, nobody that I know knows people who've gotten killed. But I mean, there's just public reporting. There was that horrible, horrible story about the girls' school in the near the coast that they basically killed the entire, young female population of some town because the school was like a quarter mile down the road from a Navy base. The US or Israel, I think the Israelis have denied it was theirs, so it was probably an American bomb, just, you know, blew up this girls' elementary school, and killed dozens of people, I think triple digits now. It's a really horrible situation for Iranians. It's also some pretty intense stuff happening, due to the Iranian retaliation. I mean, Iran has been shooting missiles and rockets. Not a lot of them have been getting through to Israel, which is pretty well shielded, but the Gulf states nearby have been getting hit with missiles and drones all the time. You also have like shrapnel from missiles getting shot down. And in the news, when they reported a shrapnel, you think it's like little bits of metal or something, but these are giant chunks of unexploded missiles and drones falling on people's homes. So I have, contacts and friends in places like Kuwait, Bahrain, the Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, who I think Saudi Arabia hasn't gotten hit so hard, but all those other four countries have also been under some pretty distressing aerial air raids, although not as bad as it is in Iran itself.
So, what are we to make of reports the Iranians celebrating and taking to the roofs to watch the bombs fall, in essentially supporting Israel and the United States? And on the other hand, a lot of the country in mourning. Do we have any idea of the pro-regime and the anti-regime factions and the numbers?
I think it would be very difficult to put a number on something, especially it's a dynamic situation and changing all the time. I mean, human beings also kind of can sway with the wind politically. I think certainly after, I mean, I don't know if you've covered on the show what happened 2 months ago, but it was a very, very horrible civil unrest and crackdown. I mean, it seemed like the police just opened fire on crowds, killed maybe, I think, let me look up the number from.
Well, Trump said 32,000. So
Yeah, there's a
that's probably based on what U.S. intelligence has.
possibly there's another organization based in Virginia verifies. I mean, I think for them it was in like quadruple digits. It's horrible. It was horrible what happened, and yeah. So I think after that level of violence by the state, some people are certainly happy to see police stations getting blown up and military leaders getting blown up. And I think certainly a lot of Iranians, including perhaps some supporters of the government, were relieved to see the supreme leader Khamenei killed. That being said, I think a lot of people are just terrified. And I think even people who might have, in the abstract or in the very beginning, thought that they wanted their country to get bombed, uh, don't actually like living through like a prolonged war and siege. And I think you also mentioned there are people mourning. I mean, the pro-government side has been able to mobilize people in a way that the anti-government side is not. I think simply because that's what happens under wartime conditions. I think though the common, more common than either of those, either pro-government or like I want the government to get bombed, is I think just fear. That's the sense I get is people are just scared. They don't know what's going to happen next. And it's an immense, after something already horrible and violent happened, now there is another immense wave of horrible violence. And how bad it gets is going to shape people's reactions going forward.
But is there any sense that the United States is dealing with a post-war situation? Are they talking to anybody?
There's been reporting here and there. I mean, I think the U.S. officials told Axios that Iran reached out to discuss terms. Iran has said it's like Iranian media has said it's the opposite, that the U.S. reached out to discuss terms. I'm sure that there is some kind of like red phone that they can pick up and talk to each other under the table. But I don't get the sense that either side is really wants to end this right now. I think the Iranian government has concluded that they ended the last war, the 12-day war, too soon. They were too quick to accept the ceasefire, and that like the worst case scenario for them would be the US and Israel just being emboldened to do something like this every 6 months. And then be able to stop when they've gotten what they wanted. And I think on the US side, I mean, they don't want to lose face. They have extremely ambitious goals. And at the moment, I think they don't think they've paid high enough of a price to make it worth it to stop.
Well, you would think, though, that the strategy on the part of the US would be to divide the IRGC, which is the sort of Praetorian Guard of the regime, from the professional military, and somehow win over the generals, because there's a 1 million man military as opposed to a couple 100,000 IRGC. So that would seem logical, that the US, even though they don't necessarily have any boots on the ground in terms of intelligence, the Israelis do, but you'd think they'd be reaching out to military leaders to tell them, that we're on your side and we want you to stabilize the country in a post-clerical regime. But instead, the US just sunk an Iranian warship, killed, 87 sailors, and this warship was invited by the Indian Navy for joint exercises, and it was just sunk, in a callous way. And I imagine the Iranian military, they don't trust the US. They're not ready to make a deal with us.
I mean, I think the split between the IRGC and the regular army tends to be a little bit overstated. It was certainly true in the beginning years of the Islamic Republic. I think now the forces have operated together for so long, and there's a bit more of an overlap. That being said, I think you're right that just U.S. policy in general has not really been to split the Iranian government in any way. It's really been to sort of push everyone's backs against the wall together. I mean, even within the IRGC, the message has sort of been like, don't try a military coup because we consider you the worst of the worst. And then there's Trump talking about how you need to lay down your arms or be killed. Lay down your arms to who? I mean, that's just, it sort of just seems like we're going to kill you all is the message. And I think also there was a sort of idea, it's been reported in the New York Times that the US was thinking that Ali Larijani, who is the sort of de facto military leader of Iran right now, could be a more like a sort of Delcy Rodriguez type in Venezuela because he's more pragmatic and so he's willing to cut a deal. I think that they correctly understood that Larijani is pragmatic and willing to cut a deal. But part of his pragmatism is also this sense that he has to fight back. I mean, Khamenei, from the Iranian perspective, was the worst of both worlds because he was both too stubborn to take a deal, but also too passive to fight. I think the lessons that the Iranian side has taken is that if you want a deal, you have to fight. And I think the Trump administration has really reinforced that. Because remember, they attacked Iran and killed its leader in the middle of negotiations, with more negotiations scheduled on Monday. They were kind of proud of pulling this kind of ruse. So I think right now, all of this is to say, in sum total, it's just not a rational decision of anyone in the Iranian government to defect. Maybe this becomes the case after a few months of war and it gets really bad. But then in that case, we might be thinking less about, a swift coup d'etat that sort of saves the country and more of like a mutiny and civil war, which is a very bad situation for everyone. I mean, maybe some people are happy with plunging Iran into civil war, but I certainly don't think that is a long-term good idea.
So just in closing, after the briefing that senators had with Hegseth and Rubio, they left, at least the Democratic senators, Chris Murphy and others, were absolutely appalled and left thinking that this is going to be a long war and maybe Trump is going to use this war to be at war, therefore be able to invoke the Insurrection Act and rig the next election. That seems to be the nightmare scenario here. What's your sense of domestic politics here? Because you've got splits amongst MAGA now over this war, and the sense that he's in a trap, Trump, because on the one hand, he has promised not to get into endless wars, but on the other hand, he appears to want a long war in order to affect the midterm elections.
I don't know if I think that he wants a long war in order to rig the elections. I mean, it's quite possible that these he doesn't really have respect for elections, and so it's possible that that sort of converges with this war. But I don't think he necessarily went into this planning for a long war. I think he was sort of high on the Venezuela operation, thinking that, okay, we can just hit people and they won't hit back, and it'll be over like that. Um, I think the U.S. was not really, I mean, if they were looking for a long war, they would have prepared a bit differently. Right now, it seems like they're sort of scrambling to figure out what's going to happen. There was reporting in Politico that the Pentagon is preparing for, like, internally for a war that lasts at least 100 days and possibly until September. And I think if it lasts that long, it's sort of uncontrollable. Now, as for domestic political splits, you asked about, like, MAGA. I think, Trump's popular base does rally around him during these things. I think that there's a risk of overstating how big the split is, but it's certainly true that a lot of people in the party are not happy with this. I think Trump's promise of no new wars, what he really meant was no new difficult wars. Like, right, he wanted like these stellar one-off shows of force that he just does something, dominates a country, and then moves on. And I think this is the case where their hubris has finally gotten the better of them. And I think we might see a little bit of discontent. I mean, like, the Republicans now seem to be just denying that this is a war or that this is going to be a long war. The line is like, oh, it's just it's very redolent of the Russian special military operation, a 3-day special military operation. They're saying, oh, it's a major military operation. It'll be over in a week or 4 weeks or whatever, and then the timeline keeps getting longer. So I think if this drags out, we could see some serious domestic repercussions, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Well, Matthew Petti, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll always love to come on.
Well, thank you. And again, I'll be speaking with Matthew Petti, who's an assistant editor at Reason magazine, who has recently reported for the BBC in Persian and English. And he now covers U.S. national security policy and its interactions with American society and domestic politics. And his latest article at Reason is "The Goalposts in the Iran War Keep Shifting." We're going to take a brief station break. We're back with an assessment on Trump's disastrous war on Iran from a former CIA officer who operated in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon against the Iranian regime.
The Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Robert Baer, one of the most accomplished agents in CIA history and the winner of the Career Intelligence Medal. He's the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers, including The Devil We Know, Dealing with the New Iranian Superpower. And he's considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the Middle East and is an intelligence and national security affairs analyst for CNN. And his latest book is The Fourth Man, The Hunt for a KGB Spy at the Top of the CIA and the Rise of Putin's Russia. Welcome to Background Briefing, Robert Baer.
Good to be back.
Well, thanks for joining us, Bob. And there's a picture of you at the BBC debating an Iranian mullah, and I take it, was that in the holy city of Qum?
It was in Qum.
Uh-huh.
He was a lower level credit. I've got pictures of the Ayatollah debating him. It was very funny because I was using Arabic And he was a bit put out that my Arabic was better than his. You know, clerics are supposed to have absolutely fluent Arabic.
Right.
So, I mean, what that told me is there's a very Iranian angle to their beliefs. It's not so much, they're just different people from the Arabs on the other side of the Gulf.
Right, but aren't they trying to, isn't their whole project about the Quds, Jerusalem? It's about them showing the Arabs that they are more legitimate in terms of Islam.
Well, they're showing the Arabs that they're more prepared to defend Islam and liberate Jerusalem as well as part of it. And their support for Hezbollah and their support for even Syrian groups. And really, even in Pakistan, they've got widespread support. People look at Khomeini as somebody who was going to revive Islam against colonialism. And they look at Israel as a colonial power, backed by the United States, if not the United States itself. So they look at the world very differently from the way we do, obviously. What surprised me is I spent many years in the CIA trying to figure out what makes Iran tick. Going way back to the revolution, I was in Tehran for the revolution. I was in India watching this. It was a true crisis for Carter. It brought down his presidency. So I was always a student of Iran. I'm not a great scholar, but I'm a student. But what really struck me was going back to Iran and just listening to these people. I spent days talking to the Basij, the militia there, people that came out in the street to put down the demonstrations. I went to, even in Karaj, there was a group of families and would-be suicide bombers that talked to me for days on end. And then I went to Qom and talked to them. And I interviewed the chief of staff of the Iranian military. And these people are determined to fight this war till the end. This is not Venezuela. Trust me.
Well, I don't know about you, Bob, but I have absolutely no confidence in the leadership of this country. In fact, Senator Mark Kelly said you could pull somebody off the street and they'd do a better job than Trump and Hegseth. I mean, Trump is the bone spur president who dodged the Vietnam draft, and he and Hegseth has been issuing these childish, bellicose, macho threats, we're just going to rain hell down on you. And Trump is now saying that he gets to decide who the next Iranian leader is, and he finds Mujtaba Khamenei, the son of the recently murdered leader, unacceptable. It feels to me these are like two nasty boys in a sandbox playing with war toys.
Well, I mean, that's we all see them for who they are, and I also know where Trump is coming from on Iran. I mean, if they have been at war with the United States going back to the revolution.
79, right.
Yeah, it's 79, and they were behind the Marines, but the problem is that's old history, and what they've done in the meantime is develop this asymmetrical warfare, in particular drones. I wrote a book about this, but I didn't know about drones. They'd be so important for the battlefield, and having these Shahid drones that can swarm our fleet. It's not like we can send the Navy back into the Gulf and protect the tankers. And ultimately, forget the human cost. Ultimately, this is a war for energy. And while we're at it, urea is a byproduct of this, and aluminum, as it turns out. And this war, which has no end to it that I can see, is going to have a major impact on the world's economy. You call it what you want, a depression, a recession, whatever you want. It's going to hurt. I do not see the Iranians giving up. Killing the Grand Ayatollah was an act of great injustice for them, for most Iranians, not all. and they will seek vengeance. It's an eye for an eye. So if the Iranians are without electricity and, living in the rubble, they will continue to seek vengeance. People do not want to admit it, but they were behind Pan Am 103. It was an act of vengeance for shooting down the Airbus. You carry that forward, and we are facing down a war that will do more damage to the West and the rest of the world than we can even calculate now. So I don't even, the rights and wrongs of it, that's not for me to say. It's, I don't know why, but what they didn't understand, it was in Venezuela. By decapitating the regime and anybody they could talk to, they made sure this is an open-ended war. The question is, how long can we fight and we run out of missiles? And, the implications, what are the Gulf Arabs? What are they thinking at this point? They threw their lot with the United States, saying that the United States is the only protector against Iran. And that's what Iran is what they're worried about. But what have we done? We don't have any troops there. Bombing Tehran buildings isn't going to win the war. Never has won a war, air power. And then you've got countries like Qatar, which the population is 350,000. I mean, they don't have a military. Who's going to protect them? And by the way, the main producer of LNG are right up there. So, I mean, what are they going to do? These Saudis don't have an army that can defeat the Iranians. You've got 93 million Iranians who are on the warpath now. So, I mean, the downsides of this, I don't even know where they are. I don't think that we're going to wake up tomorrow morning and they will have capitulated. It's not the Iranians I know.
And it appears, at least to me, Bob, that there's a real division between the US and Israel in terms of if indeed they've really thought about an end game here. I think the Israelis, first of all, they dragged us into this, according to our Secretary of State, who was clearly angry and went on the record saying that basically Netanyahu was about to pull the trigger and we had to join in. We got sort of dragged into this thing, and then Trump had to do cleanup. But I think what Rubio said, I think, is basically what's true. And if you look at Syria, there's a divergence there. El-Shara was introduced to Trump by MBS, and the U.S. policy is to stabilize Syria, whereas Israel wants to keep it weak and divided. Is that translating to Iran? Does Israel want to just basically ruin the country and keep it weak and divided forever and unstable? Whereas you would assume that the United States, even though they don't appear to have an end game, would not really want that outcome.
Well, I mean, the Israelis are in a bad neighborhood for them. And their policy now is to destroy from the air any potential resistance. They went after Iran for potential resistance, or hitting them with missiles, or even one day, who knows, they haven't been so far, making nuclear weapons. So they're just saying that we're going to get rid of anybody who's a potential enemy. And oh, by the way, the United States is going to pay for it, both in lives and money. But Ian, you have to think, I'm trying to be very neutral about this. Since the war on terror started on 9/11, we've spent $8 trillion. Now we're facing down a similar amount of money in the Gulf, if not more. How long can we borrow money to pay for these wars in the Middle East, this obsession with the Middle East? And with the Israelis murdering people in the West Bank, and with Gaza still totally chaotic, Hamas is still in control. I mean, where's the end of all this? I mean, I'm not sure when we faced a more chaotic world as we're facing right now.
Well, with the Israelis now basically telling the Lebanese, of driving them out of southern Lebanon, south of the Litani River, and they've just told people in South Beirut to get out because they're going to bomb the hell out of that. it does seem like Netanyahu is pursuing a greater Israel. You know, they've grabbed territory from Syria in the Golan Heights. They're grabbing southern Lebanon. They're driving Palestinians out of the West Bank and out of Gaza.
Well, I mean, our ambassador, Huckabee, has said, why not give the entire Middle East to Israel? You know, let them take care of it. I mean, he said that. I mean, it caused all sorts of problems, but none of this is ultimately doable. You're dealing with what, 1.2 billion Muslims who, if this war continues on, the difference between Sunni and Shia will evaporate. And who's going to take control of this?
Well, is this then about hubris, or in the case of Trump, megalomania? You know, we had hubris with George W. and the neocons, and they went into Iraq to liberate it, and it turned out that their hero, their Nelson Mandela Chalabi, was working for the Iranians, and the Iranians were the only ones that won the Iraq War.
Well, I mean, you know, why we're in the Middle East, there's all sorts of reasons for it. You know, right now with Iran, you have a large Iranian expatriate community here that would love to go back, bring the baby Shah back. Any number of exiles are driving our foreign policy, which Machiavelli warned us against. Don't let them take care of your foreign policy. And it's also, we don't understand Iran. It's a really, truly a mystery for most Americans. I don't think probably anybody at the Pentagon or the CIA right now has actually been to Iran. I'd be surprised. They haven't all retired. So they don't know what it's like on the ground there and what we're up against. And that's not even to go back to what I said, 93 million people. And it's not like we can land the Marines and to take out these missiles and drones. We don't have enough Marines. What, 15,000 of them we could probably put on the ground against an enemy of 93 million? Not going to work.
Well, there are some reports that there's a plan to send the Marines in to capture the oil fields and use that as leverage, in a way, modeling what they did in Venezuela. So is that the Trump plan, to knock off the leaders and then find somebody like Dulce Rodriguez? In fact, he even said something to the effect that that's why he doesn't want Moshtaba. He wants a Dulce Rodriguez.
Well, no, we don't have enough. It would take 6 months to get a Marine Expeditionary Force there. In the meantime, if they continue to hit tankers as they did today in the Gulf, or hit Azerbaijan, its oil facilities, or any number of them, you know, Ian, we're up against the Samson option here. They said, all right, you want war? We're gonna give it to you. And like I said, the Navy in the Gulf is not going to put a lid on this. You always be able to hit ships with drones. You can mine it, small units, boats. You can swarm defenses. And I think right now, I think the first couple of days, the Iranians hit oil facilities. They hit Ras Tanura, the refinery, and they hit Ras Laffan, the gas facility in Qatar, which drove up prices 50%. I think what they're basically telling the Arabs is, we can make this a lot worse, and there's nobody that can stop us.
Well, I'm reminded of the movie about you that George Clooney got the Academy Award for.
They took out the gas facilities, didn't they? That was Ras Laffan.
Right. That was.
Don't tell me I gave them the idea.
The movie, of course, was Syriana. So it just feels to me like the only outcome is likely to be a shattered Iran, and if we get involved with stirring up the Azeris in the north, the Kurdish Iranians in the west, the Arabs in the south, and the Baluchis in the east, that's even more chaos, right? And then you've got the situation across the Gulf where they're getting hit by Iranian drones and missiles. And if the Iranians start targeting the desalination plants, those countries are all going to run out of water. and they're already going to run out of food because all their food comes through the Straits of Hormuz, 90% of it, and that's closed. So who has the initiative here?
If their intent, and it seems to be their intent, hitting Azerbaijan yesterday, is to sow chaos and bring the whole thing down, failed states from Pakistan all the way to Lebanon. I don't know who can you say there's a winner? It's just going to be failed states one after another, like Syria, like Gaza, like the West Bank, like when will it spread into Jordan? It hasn't so far. And then you've also got the problem of Egypt. But the main thing is if you have a failed state on the Gulf, the chances of the oil facilities, the nodes, transportation of making it through indemnified are close to zero. You're going to have to ask an economist what happens when you take off 20% of the world's energy resources and just remove them from markets. I don't know what gasoline or barrel of oil go to. Will it 100, 200? But anyhow, we will feel it here in this country with gasoline prices. Oil is a globally priced, and what's going to happen to people in California who are paying, I don't know, I just throw this out, $10 for a gallon of gasoline, people who are barely making it.
Well, but who would be the winner in that scenario? Vladimir Putin, right?
Yes. Oh, I mean, he must be. I can hear the corks, champagne corks popping right now, because the Europeans, if this is cut off, is going to have to open back up the spigots of Russian oil, and they're going to have to sell out Ukraine. I mean, they're not going to have no choice come next winter. If they don't have LNG and they don't have gasoline, and they're freezing to death, or deal with Russia, they'll deal with Russia.
And already the Ukrainians are in trouble because of all these anti-missiles, these Patriot batteries, etc., that are being used up, and the inventory is pretty thin to begin with.
Yeah, well, it's across the board. I mean, the Israelis are going to run out of munitions, and so are we eventually. I mean, we can keep bombing Iran forever, and you notice we're bombing their oil facilities because the Chinese depend upon them. They'd really be mad then.
Right. Well, that just in the last couple of minutes, is that a part of the scenario to basically? It's a fantasy, of course, but Trump is completely guilty of magical thinking. Is it possible that they think that they can have leverage over China by controlling Iran's oil?
I think it's more like the Russians and the Chinese are sitting back and, watching where this all goes. The damage it could do to the United States, to NATO, to Ukraine. And we will no longer be, if we get dragged into a quagmire in the Gulf, and it's not a great place to fight a war, especially put the Navy in there, it brings us down a notch, ultimately, if this goes on for 6 months or longer.
So it can't be like Venezuela, where we knock off the leader and grab the oil, and China is left with an unpaid bill. And Russia.
Anybody who thinks Venezuela is Iran is, I don't know what to say.
Right. Well, I thank you for joining us here today. I appreciate.
Yeah, you can call me Cassandra now.
Well, it's better than Pollyanna, and I think Pollyanna's in the White House. So. Again, I've been speaking with Robert Baer, one of the most accomplished agents in CIA history and the winner of the Career Intelligence Medal. He's the author of 4 New York Times bestsellers, including The Devil We Know, Dealing with the New Iranian Superpower, and he's considered one of the world's foremost authorities on the Middle East and is an intelligence and national security affairs analyst for CNN, and his latest book is The Fourth Man, The Hunt for a KGB Spy at the Top of the CIA and the Rise of Putin's Russia. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another background briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.